The night Molly fell. Everything happened so fast I couldn't process any of it. One moment we were all in the kitchen, me, Molly, my cousin Cassie, and my stepmom Harriet. And the next, a glass shattered on the tile floor and my sister was going down hard. Her head hit the edge of the counter with a sound I still hear in my sleep sometimes. Someone screamed. Maybe it was me. I don't even know anymore. What I do know is that I was standing closest to her. I was holding a glass of water I had just poured for myself. And before I could even drop to my knees to check on her, Cassie's voice cut through everything like a knife. I saw her push her. The room froze. Every pair of eyes turned to me. Harriet moved fast. Faster than I had ever seen her move. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, grabbed my wrist so hard her nails broke skin, and pulled me back from Molly. Tell them what you did, she hissed. My name is Ashley Voss. I was 17 years old. And that was the night my life was stolen from me. The police were already at the door. The police station felt like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The fluorescent lights buzzed above my head. A detective sat across from me at a gray metal table, and I told him everything I remembered, clearly, slowly, as honestly as I could. Molly and Harriet had been fighting just before it happened. I had walked into the kitchen right in the middle of it. Molly was upset about something. I didn't catch all of it, but I remember her voice shaking. Then Harriet looked at me with that sharp, dismissive look she always had, and said something about me always showing up where I wasn't needed. Minutes later, Molly collapsed. But when the detective brought Harriet in and she spoke, everything changed. Her voice was calm and steady. Her eyes were soft with grief. She told them about my jealousy of Molly, about my temper, about how she had been quietly worried about me for months. She's always been troubled, Harriet said. This was only a matter of time. And just like that, I became the unstable one, the dangerous one, the one who had something to hide. They released me early the next morning. No charges, not yet, they told me. But when I got back to the house, Harriet was standing in the doorway like a wall. You've done enough, she said. Her voice was flat and cold. She didn't shout. She didn't even look surprised to see me. It was as if she had already decided exactly what came next. I tried to push past her. She didn't move. Dad! Called out. Dad! I could see him through the gap in the door. He was sitting in the living room chair, hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor. He didn't get up. He didn't call back. He just sat there, completely still, while his daughter stood on the front step begging to come inside her own home. Harriet stepped closer. He doesn't want to see you right now. I searched his face from where I stood. He never once looked up at me. That silence, my father's complete and total silence, was louder than anything Cassie had ever said against me. That was the moment I understood I had already lost him. Molly's funeral was on a Thursday. The church was full of people in dark clothes carrying tissues and speaking in hushed voices. I sat in the back row, far from the family section, because Harriet had made it clear I was not welcome near the front. People stared at me. Some whispered. I heard pieces of sentences drift back to where I sat. That's her. She pushed her own sister. How could she even show her face here? I kept my eyes forward and my hands folded tightly in my lap. I was not going to cry in front of people who had already made up their minds about me. But near the end of the service, Harriet walked past my row. She was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the grieving mother for every person in that church. Then she leaned down close to my ear, low enough that only I could hear. You should have been more careful, she whispered. That was when I understood clearly for the first time. This wasn't an accident that had simply been misread. She had wanted this story. She had built it, shaped it, and planted it in every person around me. She had needed it. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was packed into a car and driven 4 hours north to stay with my Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister, who had never been close to our family and barely knew my name. She was kind enough in a distant sort of way. She gave me a room with a single bed and a window that looked out over a gray parking lot. No one from home called. Not Leonard. Not Cassie. Nobody. The story, I later found out, had already spread through our neighborhood and far beyond. People from Molly's school, my old school, our church, they all knew a version of that night. And in every version, my hands were on Molly's shoulders. There was nothing I could do. No one was asking for my side. No one was leaving space for it. I spent the first month in a fog. Then one night, lying on that narrow bed staring at the ceiling, something shifted deep inside me. A decision formed, quiet, firm, and permanent. I would never beg anyone to believe me again. Not ever. For a long time after that, I focused on surviving. I finished high school at a new school where nobody knew my name. I got a part-time job at a diner. I saved money. I kept my head down and my mouth closed. But my mind was never quiet. One memory in particular kept returning no matter how hard I tried to push it away. It was 10 minutes before Molly fell. I had come downstairs for a glass of water and walked into the kitchen to find Harriet and Molly mid-argument. Molly's face was red and tight. Her jaw was clenched. Harriet's back was to me, so I couldn't see her expression, but her voice was sharp and low. Why had no one asked about that argument? Why had the investigators never followed up on it? Molly and Harriet had been fighting. Right there, minutes before everything went wrong. I had seen it. I had heard it. I pulled out an old notebook and started writing everything down. Every word I remembered. Every detail. Every moment of that evening in the order it had happened. I didn't know yet what I would do with it. But I knew I needed to hold on to every single thing. 5 years after leaving home, I was living in a small apartment in Columbus when I found an old phone buried in a box of things I had packed the night I was pushed out. I charged it more out of habit than anything else, not expecting much. Most of it was dead, photos that wouldn't load, apps long expired. But the voicemail inbox still worked. Most messages were junk. But one near the bottom made me stop completely. It was from Molly, dated 2 days before the accident. Her voice was low, like she was being careful not to be overheard. She sounded nervous. More nervous than I had ever heard her. If she does this again, I'm telling. Then the message cut off. Static. Then silence. I played it 4 more times. My hands were shaking by the third. If she does this again. Those words meant something. Molly had known something, had seen something, and she had been about to report it to someone. Someone she trusted. But the call was never completed. And 2 days later she was gone. I saved the audio file in 3 separate places and started looking for answers. It took me the better part of a year to track down Betty Harmon. She had lived next door to us on Clearfield Street for almost 15 years before moving away to be closer to her daughter. She was in her late 60s now, with silver hair and careful eyes, and she invited me in without much hesitation when I appeared at her door. We sat at her kitchen table with cups of tea. I told her clearly why I had come. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her cup down and looked at her hands for a long, quiet moment. I always wondered if anyone would come asking, she said finally. She told me she had been in her backyard that evening, watering her garden, when she heard shouting from our kitchen window. She recognized the voices easily. She had lived next door to us for years. It wasn't you and Molly fighting, Betty said carefully. It was Harriet and Molly. Harriet's voice. She was the one who was angry. Loud and angry. I set my tea down slowly. This changed everything. With Betty's account written down and signed, I turned my attention to the official records from the night of the accident. I had avoided them for years, afraid of what I might find, or afraid of finding nothing useful at all. But I was ready now. I submitted a formal request and waited 6 weeks for the medical examiner's report to arrive. When it did, I read every page twice. The injury that killed Molly was a head wound to the left side of her skull. The report detailed the angle and the force of impact. I wasn't a doctor, but I read the language carefully, and one line stood out in a way that made my stomach tighten. The injury pattern was consistent with a fall rather than a force-driven impact from behind. I had a friend in nursing school look at the report. She read it thoroughly and confirmed what I suspected. If someone had pushed Molly with force from behind, the wound would have looked different. The pattern strongly suggested Molly had gone down first, collapsing, and hit the edge of the counter on her way to the floor. So why had everyone said I pushed her? The medical report had opened a door I could not close again. Once I started looking carefully at what happened after Molly's death, the picture that formed was deeply unsettling. Before the accident, my father Leonard had named both Molly and me as beneficiaries on a life insurance policy my late mother had set up years earlier. The policy was worth $250,000. After Molly's death, With me effectively cast out of the family, that money fell entirely under Harriet's influence. Beyond the insurance, my grandfather had left a family trust that Molly had been set to inherit a portion of at age 25. When Molly died, those funds were redistributed. Leonard, who at that point did whatever Harriet directed, signed management of the trust over to her. There was also the house on Clearfield Street, originally in my mother's name, passed to Leonard after she passed away. Within 18 months of the accident, it was refinanced, and Harriet was listed as co-owner. Harriet had gained control of nearly everything, and the only thing that had stood between her and all of it had been Molly. I called my father for the first time in almost 7 years. My hands were steady, but my heart was not. The phone rang 4 times and I almost hung up. Then he answered. Hello. His voice was older, quieter. It caught me somewhere deep in my chest. Dad. It's Ashley. A long pause. Ashley. He said my name like it was something fragile he was afraid of dropping. I told him I needed to see him. I told him I had found things, documents, a voicemail, a witness. I kept my voice even and clear. I wasn't there to fight or cry. I only needed him to listen. Another long silence. I can't go through this again, he said at last. Whatever you think you found, it won't fix anything. Molly is gone. Nothing changes that. I know she's gone, I said. But you should know how it actually happened. I heard him breathing. Then Harriet's voice murmured somewhere in the background, muffled but unmistakable. I have to go, he said. Then the line went dead. After all of it, after all these years, he was still choosing her. Finding Cassie took less effort than I expected. She was living in the same town where we grew up, working at a dental office on the east side. I didn't call ahead. I drove there on a Wednesday afternoon and waited in the parking lot beside her car. When she saw me, she stopped walking completely. The color left her face instantly. I told her I wasn't there to fight. I just wanted to talk. After a long moment, she nodded, and we sat in her car with the engine off and the windows fogging slowly. She listened while I laid out what I had found: the medical report, Betty's signed account, the voicemail, the financial trail. I watched her face change as each piece landed. Her jaw grew tighter. Her eyes dropped to her hands. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. I know I was wrong, she said at last. Her voice was very small. I've known it for a long time. I leaned forward. Then tell me the truth, Cassie. She shook her head slowly. I can't do it officially. If I say anything, she'll ruin me. She told me once. She has things on me that she'd use if I ever talked. She was afraid. Genuinely, deeply afraid. After Cassie's near confession, I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. She'll ruin me. Those weren't the words of someone protecting a version of events they believed in. Those were the words of someone trapped and controlled. I went back through everything I had collected and started looking at Harriet's life before she had married my father. What I found made the hair on my arms stand up. Harriet had been married once before, briefly in her early 30s, to a man named Warren Cole in Indiana. His daughter from a first marriage had accused Harriet of forging documents related to Warren's bank accounts. The case was dropped when the daughter moved away and withdrew her complaint suddenly. Before that, Harriet had worked as a bookkeeper at a small family business in Fort Wayne. She had left that position under what her former employer described, in a civil court filing I found buried in public records, as circumstances involving financial irregularities. This was not just about what happened to Molly. Harriet had done versions of this before, sliding herself into people's lives, finding their blind spots, and using them completely. The pattern was clear, and it was chilling. I had spent 10 years surviving what Harriet had done to me, sleeping in a stranger's spare room at 17, starting completely over in a city where no one knew my face, building something small and careful out of the wreckage she had made of my life. But somewhere around the time I found Betty's statement in Warren Cole's court records and the voicemail that Molly had never finished, something in me changed completely. I stopped thinking about healing. I stopped thinking about how to move on. I started thinking about how to end it. Not with a confrontation or a scene. I had seen enough of those in that kitchen doorway to last me a lifetime. What I was building now was something quieter and far more powerful. A real case, built on documents and testimony and hard, verifiable fact. I organized everything into one binder. The voicemail file was saved in 3 separate places. Betty's signed statement, the medical report with my nursing friend's written notes, the financial records, the Indiana court documents. I was no longer the 17-year-old girl they had shoved out into the cold with nothing. I was someone entirely different now. And I was ready. About a year before I made my move, I came across an article online that made my blood run cold. It was a piece in a regional lifestyle magazine, featuring Harriet as one of the compassionate voices behind a charity that raised money for families who had lost children to accidents. There was a photograph of her at a fundraising gala. She was smiling at the camera in a dark blue dress, holding a champagne glass. The caption read, "Harriet Voss, who lost her stepdaughter a decade ago, now channels her grief into helping others heal." She had built a public image, a whole admired life, on the back of Molly's death and my guilt. People donated to causes she championed. They praised her strength. They called her inspiring. The same lie that had destroyed my life at 17 had become the very foundation of everything she now was. I saved the article. I printed it and added it to the binder. Then I sat very still and thought about the exact look that would cross her face the day that image collapsed. I had been waiting long enough. It was time to dismantle everything she had constructed, carefully, completely, and permanently. I found Grant Holloway through a referral from a legal aid organization I contacted online. He specialized in civil cases involving fraud, wrongful defamation, and, as his profile stated, the deliberate manipulation of evidence following personal tragedy. When I walked into his office carrying my binder, I expected him to flip through it politely and tell me it wasn't enough. Instead, he read in near total silence for 40 minutes. He went back and reread the financial section twice. He held the medical report up toward the window light. Then he set everything down and looked at me steadily across his desk. "This isn't just a misunderstanding," he said. "What you've documented here, the false testimony, the recovered voicemail, the financial transfers, the pattern from Indiana, this was intentional. Systematic. She built a false narrative to protect herself and used you as the cover story." I nodded slowly. "Can we do something about it?" I asked. "We can do quite a lot," he said. He leaned forward. "But I need one more thing. I need a witness who was physically present in that room." I thought of Cassie sitting in her car, shaking slightly, telling me she was afraid. "I'm working on it," I said. I went back to Cassie 3 more times over the next 4 months. Each visit I brought something new, another document, another piece of the full picture. I wasn't pressuring her. I was showing her the true shape of what she had been made part of. The 4th time she called me first. "Can you come over?" she asked. Her voice was tight and tired, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for far too long. I drove to her apartment that evening. She had a glass of wine on the table that looked like it had been sitting there a while. She didn't offer me anything. She just sat across from me, folded her hands, and looked at the wall. "She told me what to say," Cassie said. "That night, after they took you to the station, Harriet pulled me aside and told me exactly what to say and how to say it. She said Molly would want justice and that you had always been dangerous to her." I kept completely still. "I didn't see you push anyone," she continued. "I didn't see anything. I walked in after Molly had already fallen. Harriet pointed at you and told me to confirm it." She was shaking. So was I. I now had my witness. Grant moved quickly once Cassie gave her formal statement. She came to his office on a Tuesday morning, and he recorded her complete account with a court-approved notary present. Cassie was visibly shaken throughout, but she held together. She told everything, exactly what Harriet had said to her that night, word by careful word, as best she remembered. Grant submitted the formal request to reopen the case the following week. He also sent certified letters to the county where Molly's death had been officially classified, the result of an altercation, requesting a full review based on new witness testimony, new medical interpretation, and newly recovered audio evidence. I spent the waiting weeks going back through everything one final time. I cross-checked every date. I made sure nothing conflicted with anything else. I thought about every question a lawyer on Harriet's side might raise, and I made sure we had a clear answer for each one. Grant told me to be patient. He reminded me these processes moved slowly, but I could already feel the ground shifting beneath everything. 10 years of buried truth pressing upward like water under ice, searching for the first crack to break through. There was no going back. The truth was already in motion. Grant had arranged for the formal review to take place at a mediator's office, neutral ground, he called it. But I had somewhere else I needed to go first. The morning before the review, I drove to Clearfield Street alone. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The oak tree in the front yard had grown much larger, its branches stretching wide over the roofline. The welcome mat was new. Everything else was almost exactly the same as the night I had stood on that step, frozen, while my father sat 10 feet away and didn't move. I parked across the street and sat for a few minutes just looking at it. Then I got out, walked up the path and knocked. Harriet answered. For a moment neither of us spoke. She was older, more gray in her hair, deeper lines around her mouth. But her eyes were exactly the same. Sharp and calculating even behind the obvious shock of seeing me standing there. She knew immediately why I had come. I could see it in the way her whole body went rigid the instant she recognized my face. "Hello, Harriet," I said calmly. I didn't stay long at the house. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to let her see that I had come back prepared. I told her in plain, steady language that a formal review of Molly's case had been requested and that significant new evidence had been officially submitted. I watched her face carefully while I spoke. She tried to stay composed. She crossed her arms. She told me I was making a terrible mistake, that I was disturbing grief that had taken years to settle. Her voice was firm at first, but things slipped. When I mentioned the medical report, her chin came up too quickly. When I said Betty's name, her eyes shifted slightly to the left. And when I said Cassie's name, the muscle in her jaw twitched once, small and fast like a door slamming shut on its own. She recovered quickly and told me to leave. But the cracks were already visible. Over the following days, Grant heard through his contacts that Harriet had begun calling people. A former colleague, someone from the charity board, even her pastor. She was building a defense before she even fully knew what she was defending against. Others around her were starting to notice. And to wonder. Grant received a call from Leonard's personal number 3 days after my visit to Clearfield Street. My father had not been notified through official channels. Grant had chosen to inform Harriet and the county first. But somehow Leonard had found out anyway. He asked to meet me. Not at the house. At a diner near his workplace. I went. He looked like a man who had not slept in several nights. His hands wrapped around a coffee cup as if it were the only steady thing left in the room. He didn't speak for the first full minute after I sat down across from him. Then he said, "Harriet told me you're trying to reopen everything." "I am," I said. Another long pause. "She told me clearly that you pushed Molly. She's always said it." He looked at me directly for the first time. But she couldn't answer a question I asked her last night. I waited. I asked her why she was arguing with Molly right before it happened. She said she wasn't. But I remembered Ashley. I was coming downstairs. I heard them. He swallowed hard. "Are you absolutely sure?" he asked me quietly. For the first time in 10 years, I saw real doubt in my father's eyes. The formal review took place across 2 sessions. Grant presented everything in a clear, careful sequence, starting with the medical report's findings about the angle and pattern of impact, then moving to Betty's signed statement, then the partial voicemail recording, then the financial record showing precisely what Harriet had gained from Molly's death, and finally Cassie's complete recorded testimony. I sat and watched the investigator's face as each piece was placed before her. She was a careful woman who wrote notes in small, precise script and asked exact questions. When Cassie's statement was read aloud, Harriet told me what to say and how to say it. I didn't see anyone push anyone. The room became very still. Grant then presented the Indiana record showing Harriet's prior pattern of behavior. By the end of the second session, the investigator requested that the original classification of Molly's death be formally suspended pending full reinvestigation. The financial transfers were referred separately for civil review. The full truth was now in the open. Molly had collapsed. The medical evidence supported that she fell first, likely due to an undetected heart condition. But Harriet had deliberately covered it up, coached a witness, cast blame on an innocent girl, and used the tragedy to take everything she could. The silence that followed was enormous. Everything unraveled quickly after that. The charity organization placed Harriet on administrative leave within a week of the story reaching the local press. Grant had been careful about media. He hadn't contacted anyone, but Cassie had spoken to someone she trusted, and that was enough for it to travel. Within 2 weeks, a short piece ran in the local news about the reinvestigation. It didn't use the word fraud yet, but it used Harriet's name, and it mentioned a review of financial records tied to a decade-old family tragedy. That was enough. People who had admired her began asking questions openly. The church board quietly asked her to step back from her volunteer role. 2 women from the charity's leadership released a joint statement saying they were deeply troubled by the emerging details. Harriet gave one television interview. She sat very straight and spoke in a measured, practiced tone. She called the accusations the work of a bitter young woman who had never come to terms with her sister's death. But this time, no one was nodding along in agreement. This time there was evidence sitting on the other side of the table. And for Harriet that made all the difference in the world. 3 weeks after the review concluded, Leonard drove 4 hours and called me from the parking lot of my apartment building. I went downstairs to meet him. He looked smaller than I remembered him being when I was a child. Or maybe I simply saw him differently now. He was a man who had spent 10 years being led by fear of Harriet, fear of grief, fear of having to look honestly at what he had allowed to happen to his own daughter. We walked to a small park nearby and sat on a bench. The afternoon was cool and quiet. He didn't speak for a while. Then he said 3 words. I failed you. Simple. Plain. About 10 years too late. I didn't fall apart. I didn't reach for his hand. I sat with it for a long moment and let it settle. You did, I said. You did fail me. He nodded. His eyes were red. I don't know if you can forgive me, he said. I don't know either, I told him honestly. But that's not why I did any of this. I didn't come back for an apology. I came back because Molly deserved the truth. And so did I. I stood up and left him sitting on the bench. I didn't need his apology to heal. I had already done that part alone. 6 months after the review, the civil fraud case against Harriet was still moving through the courts. The insurance and trust-related transfers were being examined carefully, and Grant believed a significant outcome was coming. I wasn't holding my breath for a specific result. The process was in motion, and that alone was enough for now. I had moved back to a town not far from where I grew up, not to Clearfield Street, but close enough that I could visit Molly's grave when I wanted to. I went on a Sunday in early autumn, when the leaves were just beginning to turn orange and gold at the edges. I stood at her headstone for a while without saying anything. There was a great deal I could have said, but mostly I just wanted her to know that I hadn't given up, that I had stayed, that I had carried every detail of that kitchen, that night, every word and sound and look, in my chest for 10 years and refused to let it be buried under her version. Harriet had built an entire life on the story that I was dangerous. She had lost that life now, piece by piece, in exactly the same slow way she had stolen mine. I hadn't come back for revenge. I had told Grant that from the very beginning, and I had meant it completely. What I had come back for was the truth. And the truth, quiet, stubborn, patient, had done the rest. I placed one hand briefly on the cold stone. I told you I'd fix it, Molly, I whispered. Then I walked back to my car and I drove home.